Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 253. Today, I'm honored to welcome Michael and Peggy Mages to the podcast to share the story of their son, Mason, a bright, bold, and deeply thoughtful young man who loved everything John Deere, wielded lightsabers with pride, and wasn't afraid to be exactly who God created him to be. In this first half of our conversation, you'll hear about Mason's unique personality, the impact he had on those around him, and the day that changed everything. The drowning incident that placed Mason into the arms of Jesus. Michael and Peggy share their story with honesty and faith, reminding us of the hope we have in Christ, even in our deepest sorrow. Hi, Michael and Peggy. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Jill, for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have been looking forward to our visit. I just love any time I have the opportunity to talk to you guys. So we'll just jump right in and let you get started by giving you the opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Well, my name's Michael with Peggy. As we've now lived back in Kansas, we're living in the Wichita, Kansas area. Previously, we lived in the Colorado, Windsor area, and wanted to get back now to close to family, living in Kansas again.
We have 4 children. Madison is our youngest. She's 11, soon to be 12. And then Miles is 13, soon to be 14. And then McAllen is 16, just about 17. And then Mason is our oldest in heaven, and he would be 18 if he were here with us now.
Yeah. And what do you all do for work there?
Well, I don't pay anything to Peggy for her 24 hours of mom homeschool teacher in that.
Yeah,
but she's recently picked
because
up.
that's priceless.
That's right. It is for sure.
Thank you.
And then I am an administrator in the healthcare world. Right now, it's a mobile wound clinic where we go in and heal individuals that have chronic wounds. And then Peggy's recently, you want to talk about what you're recently doing now?
Sure. I've done a few different things. I was volunteering at an equine rescue place for a while, and then about a year ago decided to go back and do a little bit of work. I'm a physical therapist assistant, and I am working now for a company that does home health. And it's all brain injury patients. And so I just explained to them, I have a brain injury also of a different sort from a different kind of trauma. So it's pretty special.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll be talking about grief brain a little bit later. I totally understand what you mean by that. I know from hearing your story at retreats that you struggled with infertility in the early years of your marriage. Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. Well, we married in 2001, and Michael was finishing graduate school, and he talked me into waiting to have children. We were a little bit older when we got married, but I agreed. I thought it was a good choice to wait a little bit. So as soon as he finished graduate school, I wanted to start right away, and it didn't happen right away. It was about a year, and so we went to the doctor, and they did some special tests and said, oh, it's normal for a year to wait a year. So we just, kept praying that the Lord would bring us children. That my biggest dream was to be a stay-at-home mom and raise children. And so I did get pregnant, and we miscarried soon after. And that was the most devastating thing we had been through at that point. And I remember feeling like it was just brushed off, like it was normal. And so I do know it's very normal. The older I've gotten, very common. And they said, you need to give it another year before we do any fertility treatments. And so it was almost another year that we were able to get pregnant with Mason, our first.
All right. And like you said, it is very normal. It's very common to have miscarriages, but that doesn't really take the pain away, does it?
No, it does not. We were able to get pregnant with McAllen shortly after Mason turned 1. And then we have had a couple other miscarriages in the middle of that. And also very devastating, just wanting to have more children. I would have more now if we were younger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those babies will be in heaven waiting for you.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you will get to meet them one day. So Mason did finally come along, and I'm always curious about how parents choose their kids' names. And Mason is kind of a unique name. Is there a special story behind his name?
I would say yes, it's a special story because it took some time to get his name. We just couldn't agree. Was that how you say?
Yes, we had difficulty agreeing on names for all of our children.
Yeah. And the direction that we kept saying, well, maybe we need to see him and we'll better be able to name him. But it was 2 days after birth, and then after Mason arrived, and the nurses kept saying, we need a name for the birth certificate. So we just kind of continued to talk about, and I'm all one about kind of a strong name that has significant something behind it meaning wise. And I don't remember how it came upon us, but just Mason came out there, and I thought, oh, there's truly the occupation of a mason, but it was definitely something that felt to me like a strong man's name, and that's where I wanted to go. And Peggy was agreeable, and she was good about then indicating maybe, because I teased her initially that, oh, let's just call him Michael the second. And so I was somewhat joking, but somewhat not. But then I got to thinking about, I don't want a junior. And so she put Michael as his middle name. So then we ended up with a Mason Michael Mages. And our trend of the 3M initials now for all our kids continued.
Right. Yeah, you stuck with those M's, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. That's very cool. So now take a few minutes and tell us about Mason. Help us get to know him a little bit.
So Mason was a really cool kid. He was very unique and okay to be unique on his own. He did have some friends, growing up. We moved quite a bit with Michael's job. And so he always made friends really easily, but he loved the outdoors. And so he often would be found, once we started homeschooling, would often be found outside doing his schoolwork, but most often with a big old long stick in his hand, like it was a sword or a lightsaber, and just was really kind to others. He loved older people, really enjoyed being around little kids and people his age too, but he just has been described as an old soul by many people.
We had the opportunity, I guess, to really grow him into God's identity, or help him identify God's identity of who he is and how he was created. Because at birth, they call it modeling, where it's not truly a birthmark, because it was just patches throughout his face and his arms and even on his legs that I would say the capillary beds are really superficial and extra kind of sensitive to temperature change and anything like that. So it really kind of reddened his face in spots and splotches often. And we were able just to really encourage him, because many times we found individuals, even at church time where the kids go for childcare, they wanted us to get a doctor's note saying that it was not contagious.
Sure.
And things like that. So we had to really work with him early on to say, you are created the way God created you, and it's perfect. and we love it how you are. And he was able to then carry that message when he was able to talk, to say, that's how God made me. It's just a modeling. And it was really special because it took away any shyness that we see in our other boys for him to say, I can be bold. And he was bold. And the old soul kind of talk really came because he could talk to the young and to the adults very well, and just had wonderful conversation. He loved listening to adult conversation because he thought we were funny in various ways. But
he liked to laugh at all of us.
Just a good jokester, liked to try pranks and really try to scare mom on a regular basis.
He would open the closet door to hang his coat up, and he would make sure I was watching him, and then he would just throw it really hard into the closet on the floor, because he knew that it drove me nuts if anything was on the floor, not hanging on the hanger. So just funny. He was just a funny kid. And I forgot to add that about the modeling on his skin. He would get often asked by people, if he had eczema or psoriasis, I think were the two common questions he got. And he finally just started saying, no, it's just how God made me. And he was born by C-section. We did not know he was breech. And so I just had gone in for my regular checkup and on my due date with him and said, oh, you're not able to leave. We did a hospital birth with a great group of midwives, and they said, you're not able to leave. He is breech, which was a total shock to us. And there is not enough fluid to try to turn him or do anything. And we feel like it's better if you stay here. So then when he was born, they had a cardiologist come look at him because one of his legs was really mottled, and then on his cheeks mainly. But yes, I forget about that he had, that was very predominant on his skin. When he was 3, he was given, Michael used to help farm with a family that was like really close family friends. We consider them family. And when wheat harvest would come around, he would make sure to take Mason out there. And so when Mason was 3, one of the brothers gave him a pliers holster and his own set of pliers. So from then on, he insisted on only wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And it used to be John Deere. They had mainly John Deere equipment, and insisted on only wearing a John Deere shirt and John Deere boots and jeans. And he later on in life changed where he wasn't insistent on a John Deere shirt, but he always wore a shirt tucked in with his jeans and his belt and pliers and a pocket knife on the other side. So I think he really embraced the freedom of being able to homeschool and being outside. And, he wouldn't be able to wear those probably to a regular school.
No, probably not. Oh, but I can just picture him. I've heard your story before because we've done retreats together and that sort of thing. And I can just picture him in my mind, walking around in those boots and with that belt on and his pliers, and he was ready to go.
Yeah, he was very confident, and he would always run to the door to open the door for the ladies. I think Michael taught him that early on, and he just has done really well with that, or he did really well with that. So
yeah,
it was a blessing.
Yeah, that's a great skill to have for
yes.
sure. So on May the 7th, 2020, it was the height of COVID. And you and your boys were spending some time outside that day. Sounds like you did that a lot. Mm-hmm. Talk about what happened that day.
Okay, so we are part of a homeschool group that meets once a week, and it had also been moved to Zoom meetings, which was very unique because none of the homeschool that we did was online. And we had just finished. The kids had done their testing and the day before, and we decided the next day, May 7th, was going to be our fun day to relax and do whatever we wanted. And so we had gone on a bike ride down a trail that morning and saw some beautiful bald eagles. We saw a mother with her eaglets in the nest, and Then we had a family Zoom call with my family, and then a friend had contacted us to see if we wanted to go to the lake. Her daughter had just gotten her own paddleboard and wanted to go take it out. And I said, well, why don't you guys just come to our lake? We lived in a subdivision in Colorado that had 4 or 5 lakes, and we had one that was a few blocks from our house, and we would just walk over there and had our kayaks tied down on the beach and could just go out there whenever we wanted. And so had them come and meet us. And Mason was really excited because this was a friend of his from his class that he met with once a week. And her mother was the teacher, the mom that led the class. So he was really excited. And so he and Miles had asked if they could ride their bikes over ahead of me. And I said, yes, just wait until we get there to get in the water. And so we did. We walked over, after they had gotten there, and he wanted to shoot her and her sisters with his Nerf gun. And so he was hiding behind a tree. He had already changed into his irrigation boots. So farmers probably are the only ones that know what those are, but he had asked me that morning to get him a bigger pair because his were too tight. And his brother Macallan, who's younger than him, but had bigger feet, said, you can just borrow mine. So we thought, okay, done. And I had talked to him about just wearing his swim trunks and water shoes. And Mason didn't really love the lake. He loved to explore on the lake, around the lake, and then on an island in the middle of the lake. But they had to get there by boat. So he said, no, Mom, I'm wearing my jeans. I really just want some irrigation boots so I don't get my jeans wet. So Miles, who was 9 at the time, no, he was 8 at the time, had gone to pick him up in the canoe. So Miles got his life jacket on, went to pick up Mason kind of just around the corner a little bit where he was hiding behind a tree in case the girls showed up, and they hadn't showed up yet. So I saw them going across the lake to the island in the canoe. And I remember seeing Mason without a life jacket. He normally wore a life jacket, but he wasn't on the lake that often because, like I said, he just didn't love it. But I thought, why doesn't he have his life vest on? But it didn't bother me because all of my kids had gone through all the swimming lessons and were wonderful swimmers. And so all that to say, they had been on the island. I was sitting on the beach just visiting with my friend, and a horrible windstorm came up. And it was so strong that it was blowing other people's kayaks into the lake. And Macallan had just turned 12. So he had gone out in the kayak to go fishing. And all of a sudden, horrible windstorm came up. And there were a few people on the lake that came in quickly. Macallan had come in really quickly on the kayak, and he was really mad. And we couldn't hear each other because the wind was blowing so heavily, and the sand was blowing really heavily. And I was just pulling people's kayaks out of the lake that had flown in, mad at them because they hadn't tied them down, thinking, what on earth are these people doing? I didn't have any thoughts that anything wrong was going on with our boys. And this was a pretty small lake. You could see across to the other side, but I couldn't see where they were. And so eventually my friend said, do you think we should go look for them? And I said, yes. So we started to walk around the backside where the wind, would have blown them. And at one point we thought we saw our canoe that they had gotten in to go to the island. And then the canoe was moving. And so I thought, no, that wasn't them. But we were walking that way, and I saw a rescue vehicle pull up onto the beach from the neighborhood, and cars didn't drive on the beach. So that was odd in the first place. And then I thought, well, okay, is this guy here because the boys are having trouble? So I went up to him and I said, my boys were on the island in the canoe and I don't see them. Is that why you're here? And he said, come with me. And so we walked up to this huge house that the people's house was right there on the lake, and walked up onto their deck into their living room. And Miles was sitting with a bunch of blankets wrapped around him, sitting in front of the fireplace. And nobody was saying anything about Mason. And I went over and sat by him and I said, "Hey, buddy, what's going on?" And he said, "We capsized." And I said, "Okay, well, where is Mason?" And he said, "I don't know." And so then the woman who lived in the house, we did not know, but she said they capsized and another neighbor called 911 and came and got another neighbor's husband or something like that. And they tried to go out in your canoe to save your boys because Mason apparently was hollering for help, treading water. And she said Miles was close to the shore, so I coaxed him out, but he was kind of just laying there. So I don't know if he was exhausted or, we don't know. So he was out, and Mason, she just said I couldn't get to him in time. And there were a whole bunch of rescue people there. I think there were probably 10 to 20 rescue people there. And I said, well, Mason does not have a good sense of direction, and they're just all standing around the lake. I don't understand. They should be walking out into the street. He hasn't been on this side of the lake, really. So maybe he's walking around. I had no clue he had gone under the water. The fire chief is who I encountered first, and then the chaplain. There was a victim advocate woman who kind of followed me around that they introduced me to, and I never really understood what her purpose was. She was very kind, but the fire chief kept saying things to me like, right now we're searching for Mason, and we are in rescue mode. And if we're not able to find him within a certain time period, we're going to have to move to recovery mode. I never recall hearing him say, we arrived when he was still above water and we saw him go underwater. I later found out that that's what happened, but I just didn't know. So anyways, I did not have my phone. I think I left it with the kids because we said to the kids on the beach, I want you to stay here. Don't go anywhere. We're going to go look for Mason and Miles. And one of the neighbor boys was with me and insisted on going. And I said, no, you please stay here. And so I don't remember if I left my phone with him or what, but ended up calling Michael, who was at work in Loveland, and said, hey, he answered the phone, first of all, which was a miracle because usually if I called him during the day, he was either in a meeting or, knew that I would call again if it was important. So usually didn't answer the phone, but it wasn't my phone number that showed up. And so he answered right away. And I don't remember what I said other than, Mace, we can't find Mason. We're at the lake. I think you need to come. And Michael says my friend that was with me had already contacted him. So do you want to share anything?
Before she had called from Peggy's phone, her friend called me at work. I just had finished a meeting and said, oh, perfect timing. Peggy's calling. So I called and picked up the phone, and she said, we're not able to find Mason. Your wife's out at the edge of the beach kind of looking and trying to find him. So I thought I'd just let you know I'm having the kids go home. And I think she said she's taking the kids home. And so I dropped everything. And then when Peggy called, I was about 10 minutes, already had left work, but it's a 20-minute drive. So when I arrived, I drove around to where I could get to that access to the beach where they had driven on, because I saw all these rescue or emergency vehicles all over the place in that neighborhood. So I just drove down there and walked into the beach and found Peggy, and they took me in to see Miles, and that's where I met with the fire chief and the chaplain. And they too reiterated, well, we're still trying to do to find him. We just can't get a boat in on this water, and we're going to have to get a hard bottom boat coming from Loveland. So I said, well, let's go look. I need to see what's going on, and walked out to see, because I was really of Peggy's mindset when she told me, well, he's a good swimmer. They weren't far from the edge of the shore. He's probably out walking and now kind of disoriented because it was a windstorm that it was dirty, sandy in the sky that we couldn't see really well across everywhere. And just to open your eyes, you're getting pelted with sand and that. So it was just difficult. So we got out there and came back, and the chaplain reiterated, we're probably going to be moving over to the recovery mode soon. And that triggered me to say, wait, they still haven't found him, and they know he's not out. They know something, and I know now that it takes me 20 minutes to get from work to home. I don't see that we're going to have a good outcome here. So I think Peggy and I were both then in over shock, because there was no emotional outburst of anything. It was just, what's going on? We got to figure this out. And I said, well, how long will it take for the other boat to get here? And they said, well, we've called them, and it's been about 15, 20 minutes, but they have to get a crew to get on the boat, and that could take some time. So it's just not like there's somebody sitting there, a number of individuals. So they had to get a crew to come out. And I said, how long will that be? And they said, well, it could be up to an hour and a half overall. So the fire chief visited with me about that, and he said, yeah, we don't know. We're just at their mercy. We can't get our boat. There was a soft air up boat, raft type thing, that they couldn't get it on the lake. So he recommended we go home. And I said, that might be good. I get Peggy relaxed and cleaned up from all her sand all over.
I was freezing at the time, and it wasn't cold outside that I can recall. I think I probably was just in shock. So, and I had sand all in my hair. It was crazy. We're from Kansas and used to the heavy winds, but that was something I feel like I've never seen before.
Yeah. Well, and in your mind, you're still thinking rescue. And then they start talking recovery. And do you really understand what that means at that point? Yeah, I would think it would be really hard to even process that.
Yeah, I was quite numb when I heard that, because then it was, okay, somebody better do something, because when you tell me it's recovery, and I know the time that I've left to time I arrived was 20 minutes, and it was about another 15 to 20 that we walked around, that if his brain was without oxygen in that 20 minutes, I don't know that I want to recover or to rescue, because if he truly was underwater. And I just said, I just can't go there. We've got to figure out where he's at.
Right.
That's what I kept holding on to.
So you took the advice of the rescue workers, and you went home for a while, and you were able to have a conversation with your kids. Talk about what that was like.
Sure. As Peggy came down after the shower, and the kids and I were sitting there in the living room, I was just, in silent prayer to myself, because I was wondering what's going on, and finally able to process. And as she came down, I knew, okay, wait, I've got to deliver a message to my kids on what's about to happen, or what they're about to hear, because it's real. And I knew that we've been there in the house now 40 minutes or 45 minutes and still haven't heard anything. They said, we'll call right away. I said, just called on the Lord to say, I need words to be able to talk about what's going on and what we're going to experience. Luckily, Peggy at some time ago had me make some wall hanging with scripture on it, and hanging in front of me was 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18. And so I read that out loud. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. And I said, kids, you need to understand something in this circumstance. We're not going to see Mason come home tonight, and he won't be home again in our house. And Madison, just in her young innocence, said, well, where's he going to be? Who's he staying with? And I had to relate more to her. I said, Madison, do you know when you capture, she was good about catching bugs and keeping them in a jar and all kinds of critters in a jar. I said, do you know sometimes that your bugs don't survive and you have to throw them out because they died? And I said, that's how Mason's not coming home. He died. And I said, what I just read here tells us that we have to give thanks in all circumstances. And this is a circumstance that I don't want to give thanks for, but I'm going to, and I'm going to rejoice somehow, because that's what we're commanded to do, and I need you to help me. And I need us all to hold each other in that regard, because there's got to be a way that we can continue to give thanks in these circumstances. So I'm thankful you all are here tonight, because Mason's not, and he's with Jesus again. And that's what that looked like there, because it was most difficult because I had no words to say, and I had to really lean into God's promises and his direction for us in that regard. And then probably another 15, 20 minutes, we got the call that we could go back down to the area as they had found him.
Yeah. So you got that call and you returned to the lake. What was that like?
So, first of all, we had only lived there 7 months. And when COVID shut everything down, including church, we decided our church was very new to us, and we had just visited a small group and they were not meeting on Zoom. It was just regular church. So we decided, okay, we need to find a church that will meet online or not. We were okay to meet in person. We felt like, COVID had run its course as it was supposed to have done. And we were ready to be back with people. And so it had just been 3 weeks that we were actually in 2 different small groups with two different churches. And so one of the small groups, there were 4 or 5 people there from that. And they just stayed. So they were there when we went home, and they said, we will stay here and pray, and we will be here when you come back. So they said, one of the moms said, Peggy, it was beautiful. They got the boat on the water, and one of the rescue divers had a dog, and they did not even go out very far. And the dog jumped in the water, circled around, and they threw a marker out and called the dog back in the boat. And the diver went down and brought his body up. And she said they were very discreet. You hear body bag, and I never would have thought about that, but they put him in a body bag. And the news from Denver was there. And so they were trying to be very private. And they, they were able to carry his body up to the side of a house. And she said, when his body came up out of the water, she said, we didn't see it, but we saw a bald eagle had been circling around and dove down and almost touched the water. And she said it was so beautiful, but then we had to wait. It was just really awkward. We had to wait. They said he's over on the side of the house waiting for the coroner to arrive. She's over in Fort Collins, and she won't be here for a good 45 minutes. We can put some chairs over there by him, and you can just sit, but we don't want you to unzip the bag or look at him or touch him. It was just very odd. So,
Well, I'll add, as she was talking with the small group moms that were kind of telling her about that, one or two of the rescue divers came up to me and said, "Oh, we're so sorry for your loss. We've been praying and just in hoping all the best that could come from this." So the divers were telling us about their prayers and lifting things up to God for just peace for us and an understanding. But they wanted to find Mason quickly, and that's all he focused on was, "Lord, help me find this boy for the family." So it was touching that the rescue divers were coming to us and telling us about their prayers and how they relied on God to give them peace and to do this for us. And that helped in that regard because there was quite a few families. And as Peggy indicated, we had visited multiple churches. So there were multiple pastors on the beach that whole afternoon. And it was just amazing because they all felt, and we knew them all because we visited their churches multiple various times. And so it was 4 pastors and crowds from each church there. Overall, just loving on us and encouraging us where we could. And then we asked to see Mason, and that's what Peggy was talking about. That we had to wait on the coroner was given our instructions, and she'll let you know if you can see him or not. So we just went and sat at the feet. I imagine it was the feet. It looked like it, and waited for her to arrive because we weren't going to leave without getting to see him there. So we watched the sunset over the lake as we waited.
And then you were able to see him eventually?
Yes. Now, she didn't recommend it. And so I got a little fired up, and Michael said, "Wait just a minute, Peggy, let me go talk to her." And he told her we were going to see him. So he said, "Peggy, how about I go look, and let you know if I think you would be okay." So he did, and he came back and said, "I think you'll be just fine." And my memory is that he looked absolutely perfect. You could not see modeling on his cheeks after being under that cold water. It was May 7th, so early, and people kept talking about the runoff from the mountains, that fill the lakes and how cold the water was. And it was cool, but like Madison had just been in there swimming, So I'm sure normally when he would get cold, the modeling would be more predominant on his skin, but he just looked perfect. So yeah, we're glad that we were able to.
Yes, I'm glad you had that moment with him. I'm sure that was important just for you to be able to see him.
Yes.
And to know that he was okay, that
Yeah.
he was with Jesus. Yeah. The night before all of this happened, Mason had participated in a Zoom youth group meeting, and the subject that evening was fear. Talk about that.
Yeah, it was that Wednesday night. I came home late, or just as he had wrapped up his Zoom youth group, and he said, "Dad, we were talking about fear and how they were saying it's a sin to be afraid because we're commanded to be not afraid." And I said, "That's interesting. Let me hear more about that." Mason always wanted a milkshake, so he was, I could tell, willing and wanting to talk more after that youth group, and I wanted to spend some time with him. So I said, "Hey, why don't we go for a milkshake and you can tell me more about that? Because that's interesting that you disagreed that it was a sin to be afraid." So as we went to have our milkshake and that, he said, "But Dad, people scare each other all the time. So it's nothing that is really a sin." And that's what I was trying to tell them. But he said, as we talked more and more, it was about how Jesus fell asleep in the boat with his disciples, and the storm came up and they were fearful. He said, "But Dad, they knew where to go. They went right to Jesus and woke him to lay their fears out to him, and he was able to handle the storm and show them that there's nothing to be afraid of." And that was powerful for me because already he was thinking through things there at age 13, at when you're fearful, and he knew who to go to, because it was right there in scripture where the disciples went to Jesus when they were afraid, and he took care of things and calmed the storm. And so that was really powerful. And I said, Mason, you are wise beyond years right now to have this conversation at age 13, at knowing that, yes, sometimes fear happens, or we become afraid. But how Jesus tells us not to be afraid, he knows that's sometimes not the case. But he wants you to come and be dependent upon him and come to him just like the disciples did. And that's, I think, is the message. And I'm grateful that you're telling me that's what you were trying to say to the youth group, that we even got a response back from the leader shortly after he found out.
We were actually in small group with them, and he later shared with us that he was just greatly impressed. He was one of the helpers. He wasn't the leader, but
okay. One of the adult.
How impressed he was with how Mason answered that. And he sent it to us, but we're not able to find where we saved that.
I understand.
Isn't that how it goes?
Yes. What a wonderful gift that conversation was, though, for you guys. And that little time getting the milkshakes, and, that's just a special gift from God.
Yes, just that Wednesday before his drowning. And it was just a touching and something I'll never forget about is, wow, I had great precious time with him the night before.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very special. So this happens, and now you find yourself planning a funeral, and you're still reeling from what has just happened. From what I understand, you guys put together a celebration of life that really captured Mason's personality. Talk about that.
Yeah, we were still quite frustrated, about the whole COVID limitations of things.
Yeah.
And it really began with our visit at the funeral home with the funeral director to coordinate all the details with the state of Colorado and all that had to transpire to make sure they did it according to regulation or whatever. So in the conversation, I was really kind of at my wit's end of all these other things that had nothing to do with anything other than control, because I just lost a son to drowning, and I wasn't having any of that other stuff because it was ridiculous. It meant nothing in my world now. Sure. And so I was getting kind of, I guess, contrary in my responses. And because the funeral home director said, okay, we got to fill out this paperwork for the death certificate, and there's occupation on there. And I said, well, what do you mean occupation? He's a kid. He didn't have an occupation. Well, we've got to put something in there. And I said, what do you normally put? Do you have many kids come through that don't have an occupation or whatever? Why they ask for an occupation? What does it matter? They're dead. And he said, well, we got to have something. And I said, oh, well, because he said, we can just put student. And that then triggered me. And I said, oh, no. Let's do this right. His occupation was a Jedi. He was a Jedi. So put that in there. So he did. And that then started the conversation about Star Wars and how he was a true Star Wars fan. And we started talking about, well, yeah. After that, we went home and told everybody, and they said, oh, yeah, you don't need to wear a suit and tie, because that's the other thing that the funeral home director asked. He said, do you want me in a suit and tie for this? And we're like, no. Mason would not appreciate a suit and tie. He was a t-shirts and jeans. So at least do not wear a jacket. Just wear a Star Wars shirt, we told him. And so we told this story with my family, and a friend of Peggy's heard the story too. And she said, oh, I can make you a Star Wars shirt. And so she made a shirt to say, Mother of Jedi, the Jedi. Jedi Mom. And then other family members all wanted a shirt. And they said, "Oh, could I get Aunt of the Jedi, Jedi Aunt, sister of Jedi, brother, dad?"
Yeah.
So we all
Love
got
that.
shirts made by this friend of Peggy's.
This sweet friend of mine, and she corralled some of our other homeschool friends to come and help her, and she got, I think, 40 something shirts that she made, so we could all celebrate him and his Jedi self.
Because that began the whole development of his celebration of life, to have a Star Wars themed or dressed celebration of life, to where even we got a call later that the funeral home director said, "A good friend of mine is Darth Vader on a regular basis, and it is a decked out true Darth Vader costume. It's not just some shabby thing put together. Would you want Darth Vader to show up?" Now, for those that are not Star Wars fans, we did our best to make sure that it was not blasphemous in the regard, because Peggy's concern was, well, Darth Vader was not a good guy. And I said, well, in this whole story, Luke really gets him to transform and, in an essence, in a secular way, repent and
Right.
and step away from the dark side and into the light, right at the end of one of the the trilogy shows, movies. And so we did our best to say, okay, Darth was saved by that time, so he can come. And we told everyone, especially in this time of, okay, it's very casual. If you have a vintage Star Wars shirt or anything Star Wars related, and if you have lightsabers, bring your lightsaber or blasters. And everyone did t-shirts. And the church, even, that was insisting that we at least get handed a mask as we entered for the COVID, they made Star Wars material and got Star Wars material and made Star Wars masks as well for the whole COVID component. And then to start things off, we put together kind of just a series of photos of Mason in remembrance of him. But then I had the thought that on all the Star Wars movies, there's a prelogue, epilogue component that scrolls on screen. So
Yeah.
if I could, I'll read what we posted and had scroll just like
Yes.
it was at the beginning.
Please do.
It's titled An Eternal Hope. It is a period of civil unrest during a manufactured pestilence. Rebels led by a Jedi Knight set up a hidden base in a northern Colorado outpost. The rebels and Jedi won the victory under the authority of their Savior, Jesus Christ. As the rebels continued to run with perseverance the race marked out for them, they fixed their eyes on Jesus, the founder and perfecter of their faith. Through the wonders of God's creation, during the battle, the rebels and the Jedi were overcome by a destructive wind force. Their transport was capsized in a tragic event. The casualty in battle was the Jedi, who now has left the confines of this world to serve the rebels in glorifying the victor over sin and death in the most epic battle of all time. May the peace of the Lord be with you. And that started out our celebration of life with that scroll.
So I just want to add that I think Mason was probably 3 way younger than I really agreed with, but I went along with Star Wars nights with Michael and the boys. And, Miles was young, Madison was young. They would go to bed, and Michael would have Star Wars movie night, like on Friday nights with Mason and McAllen. And so he used it as a good teaching lesson for them, about good and evil in our world.
I really focused there because the whole Star Wars story truly is a culmination or mix of various religions around the world to make this story, and the Jedi is somewhat of a religion. And so rather than jump into that secular side and hold that, I used it to show, look, in reality, there is good and evil, dark and light, and turned it into an opportunity to say, okay, I'm pulling our Christianity religion out of this movie because it's in there as well, and showing that as the main theme, to say even Darth had to come to repent and come to the light side, or come to know that. And in this, we're not worshiping anything in that regard for the religion of the Jedi or that, on the use of the Force. We're really looking to say good does come over evil, and it's all in God's design. The way Jesus created things was specific to his design, and we see that even in the movies, and we see that in everyday life. So there's bad things that happen, yet it's all within God's design, and that's where we have to come to.
As we close this first part of our conversation with Michael and Peggy Mages, we've come to know their son, Mason, a kind, courageous, and faith-filled boy who lived with joy and purpose, and we've walked with them through the heartbreaking day they lost him. In next week's episode, we'll continue this powerful journey as Michael and Peggy reflect on life after loss, how grief has impacted their marriage, their parenting, and their walk with God. They'll share honest advice for newly bereaved parents, talk about what it means to persevere in faith, and describe the beautiful ways they continue to honor Mason's life. I hope you'll join us for part 2 of this moving testimony of hope, healing, and holding fast to the promises of God. And I look forward to sharing that with you next Wednesday.